sent him the stuff like I've been sending to people for a year, like I said, and he's really interested in trying to help me put this anime together for the title track, Red Omen. And that's even despite the album's a year and a half old, almost 2 years old. I'll be like, well, this is what I've been trying to do from the very beginning. Really illustrate the lyrics in that cartoon kind of fashion, because that's why I wrote the tune. It feels like a childhood memory that bleeds into a moment of today that then looks into the future.
Welcome to the Better Each Day podcast radio show with Bruce Hilliard. Today and every day, reaching out for innovative ideas in every way. Today's show is brought to you by your future. It comes with a lifetime guarantee. Make a better each day now, baby. Better in every way.
Ed Roman is an award-winning singer, songwriter, performer, and multi-instrumentalist from Shelburne, Ontario, Canada. Blurring the lines between pop, rock, folk, and country music genres, Ed's uniquely crafted songs have received regular rotation on more than 100 terrestrial stations across North America and more than 400 stations worldwide. It is extremely interesting, a lot of fun, and I think you'll find this a glimpse into the world of Ed Roman.
She goes, and that's the way she goes. Just like an open door or window, that's the way she goes. Just like the bathwater with the baby, that's the way she goes.
Technical difficulties. The 21st century is fraught with them.
You do a lot of your own production, don't you?
Yeah, like, I mean, you know, hand in hand with, like, being a musician, recording, you know, fiddling around, going through the process of figuring out, you know, how a song should be recorded, also kind of goes hand in hand with the songwriting process, too, because it's developmental, depending on how you've done it. Like, I mean, if I'm tracking something that, you know, that the band has already been playing for a year, we come in and do it live off the floor. And if there needs to be a vocal overdub or a harmony or a solo that wants to be retaken, this has sort of been the standard for many years when it comes to that. But then when I'm writing, or, you know, ideas wherever they may be, on a guitar or a bass or a keyboard or a drum kit, I build those ideas around that initial sort of feeling, you know. It's like I'm excited about this lyric or this chord progression or something, and then recording, that technical part, sort of takes hold. And I'm lucky, actually, with my friend, who I've known for a long time, since I was 16, Michael Jack. He's always here assisting me, engineering, so I don't have to play the Todd Rundgren running from control room to, you know, the studio. And then, I mean, I've done it.
Exactly.
I'll do it in the future, but
that wears you out after a while, doesn't it? You got cords tangled around your legs.
I even had this app on my phone at one time, so I could have, like, my controller doing Bluetooth through the computer, so you can, like, you know, at least hit stop and record and rewind or go back to your A section or whatever you were doing, right? But it's just, like, also nice to have another head here, you know, while you're going through the process, because they might be like, you're disappearing with your head, you know, in the cupboard there, or it's like, no, let's just keep going, everything is fine.
It's hard to concentrate on performing the music artistically when you're turning knobs and tripping over chords and banging your guitar into something, and yeah.
Well, but I mean, and that's the thing too. I mean, a lot of times, like, if I'm doing that and I'm by myself, I just let it run.
Yeah.
And when I'm happy with what I've done, I just go back and start building around that.
When you started recording, were you back in the analog tape style stuff?
I still have 2-inch tape in my cupboard.
Because I was, you said to leave it
tracking, you know.
You said leave it running because you couldn't do that with tape.
Well, no, you only had 15 minutes or 30 at the different IPS, depending on how you ran it.
You had to shut it off and be really careful not to break it, and you can't edit it like you can.
And the Tascam and Fostex machines, like the 4-track and the 8-track and 16-track that they came out with. Like, I mean, those were renters, but, like, it was always fun to play with them.
Yeah, and then you would hear, the Beatles did Sgt. Pepper's on a 4-track, and it's like, what?
Well, but that's it, man. Bruce, like, aside from, like, getting into the music, a big part of, like, who the artist was the history lesson behind why the music was created and how it was created. So here you mentioned the Beatles, I mentioned Todd Rundgren. There's a whole list of people that have always kind of had their hands in that engineering pie. I mean, Jimi Hendrix with, Electric Ladyland and Eddie Kramer, and the development of that studio was all around Jimmy and, a lot of, what Jimmy, how he wanted to push things, and technology, and Eddie being available to do what he did. And it's crazy to say, Mike and Eddie have worked together. Like, Mike was assisted Eddie Kramer at a session here in Toronto.
Oh, wow.
And I find that really interesting. And then to have Mike's knowledge sitting and talking to Eddie for hours, or Jack Douglas, who was like the last cat that ever saw Lennon before he was shot in front of the Dakota. They were working on an album together. I mean, that's like what I'm getting at. I'm so privileged to have somebody like Mike there with me doing what I'm doing.
I have to ask this. Your music is fascinating. I think you're inventing your own genre. I call it happy music. But I don't know, or popcorn, like movies that you just watch and you eat popcorn because they're fun to watch. They aren't deeply meaningful unless you bring to it whatever you bring to it. But I think the world needs that. Who were your influences growing up?
Great question, and I call it kitchen sink music. Because
it's got to have a name.
You got What's the genre? What's the subgenre?
Well, we can't use grunge. We can't use heavy metal. I don't know. Make one up.
Yeah, but I mean, there's a punk tune on the last record. So,
is there?
Clone the Sheep.
And I'll play it. Here's Clone the Sheep, counting sheep by ones.
Clone the sheep. Everybody safe now, go to sleep. Clone the sheep. Everybody safe now, go to sleep. Count one.
But I mean, your question, influences, like, it's a boat of people because it's not just one genre or one era. I mean, I fell in love with people, like you said, at a young age, like the Beatles and the Stones, and my grandmother, and like I lived in a house of 3 generations. My grandparents, my parents, my brothers and sisters, and I. So everything my grandmother and grandfather were into, from like Eastern European stuff. But my grandmother was like, she loved Sinatra, she loved Presley, she loved popular music of the day, and she was always singing. And my mom and dad were of that sort of jazz era, so they loved like Buddy Rich and Mingus and Basie and Duke Ellington. And then my brothers and sisters, I remember like pulling Machine Head Deep Purple out of a milk crate in the basement when I was like 6, going like, what's this? So, and then my sisters were into like folk music in the 70s, late 60s. And then in my own sort of coming of age in the 80s and 90s, it was like highbrow kind of progressive music, whether it was like Rush, Yes, Level 42, I mean, sort of musician-influenced stuff. And obviously, electric musician, composer Jaco Pastorius from the United States, as a bass player, he was an immense influence to me. But it was always a real freedom inside of the writing, the performance, the capturing of the art that I really fell in love with. Like, in Muscle Shoals documentary, or even the Wrecking Crew one that's come out in the last couple of years, that's sort of like they're sitting around and ideas are developed because of the feeling and the mojo. And I guess that's what I loved about that sort of connection to other people's enthusiasm. They were always pointing these things out to me, like to hear that lyric, or I can't believe they said that, or listen to that solo, or all of those things were a big part of that, because somehow there was that part of that spirit, that human spirit that was captured in that.
The enthusiasm, they say enthusiasm is contagious. I think that's true. And technically, somebody doesn't have to be that spot on, but if they're having fun, or it's just catchy, or it's just cool, what you're saying, the enthusiasm element is cool.
Yeah, and things have become so clinical and quantized. I mean, I'm put on a Yusef Lateef record, and the tempo will speed up almost 8 to 10 beats per minute between the top end of the tune and the end of the tune, but I don't care, because it's in the pocket. It's got its own soul and its own life, and I like the rough edges.
I like the way you answered that too, because you went like everything from 9 Inch Nails to the Cow Sills as far as span of music.
Well, that's just it, kitchen sink. Like, I mean, even writing, like, I mean, it's like you have an idea about something, and it's emotionally motivated, whether it's through a melody or a lyrical idea. And then what I've kind of learned is to stop thinking and worrying so much about a forced direction. You're this kind of artist, so it has to be this. And artists, like we've mentioned, they all kind of push those exterior envelopes of ideas. So with the songwriting process, it's kind of the same thing. If all of a sudden it kind of comes out like a folk number, I'll go there. I'm not afraid to do it, because, there's all kinds of music, Ellington said. There's really 2 kinds, good music and bad music. And,
yes.
and there's all those elements inside of all kinds of genres. So I'm not unabashed to go somewhere and then put it on a record. People will say, well, why would you put an instrumental tune, 2 instrumental tunes on a record? And I'm like, because I felt they needed to be there. They were written as a part of these emotional sort of like feelings and stuff, and they help illustrate a bigger part of the picture. Just because I'm not saying anything doesn't mean that the lyric or the melody isn't saying something to you.
Well, yeah, you are saying something. It just doesn't have words,
Right.
Right.
You
say the Ventures never said anything.
Right. And popular music has changed so much. So, like writers I've mentioned, like Ellington or other people that were melodic writers, and at some point it was lyrics meeting those melodies, or vice versa, depending on what went on. People had a whole other listening process. I mean, that old grandfather mentality is out in the shed whistling, and it's some classic, Cole Porter tune or Jerome Kern number. It's because that melody stuck, and to us today, we have them, in us as well. We know the lyrics to them, but we could all whistle Happy Birthday or Row, Row, Row Your Boat, so melody is just as important, right?
It is, and I don't know. I start to sound like my dad sometimes. He's gone now, but anything after the big band era was crap to him. So,
kick in the curmudgeon, right?
Yeah. So, sorry, Dad, but here we go. I'm like, hip hop. I get it, but it's like, no, I got to have some melody. And then they started incorporating, snippets of other things, and now it's always featuring somebody or something like that. But God, I'm so old school. Thanks, Dad. What did you do to me?
But see, that's the beauty and the diversity of art that we have to, I think, recognize, is that despite that they fit in these boxes as a result of where we live, how we live our lives, what happens to us, it doesn't matter what it is. There are all these sort of cultural experiences. And what I notice in history, in the history of music, there have been these sort of like bell curve moments, almost Renaissance periods, where it's like everything goes, and that sort of open-mindedness to like, well, yeah, it's not really my cup of tea. It's on the radio, and that's cool with me. And eventually, something might come on that I dig, right? But at the same time, it's so subjective to where we are. I have to remind myself of that too, because I'm very old school in my approach to. I play real instruments. We track stuff. I don't use a lot of samples. I don't do that. That's sort of not my bag. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean or that I would negate the idea of trying it in the future, especially if I found it in that same kind of way I was mentioning, that earnest path of like, well, here we go. And let's see how it works out. And somebody might criticize me for it because it isn't what they think it should be. And it's my interpretation of what it is. Like, look at Coltrane. I mean, when he came out with Giant Steps, he got so much criticism. Even Downbeat magazine was like, it's just vibrato. It's just bravado stuff. He's just running stuff all up and down scales. There's no compositional stuff. They didn't understand what Coltrane was doing. It was jazz. But they didn't consider it the right kind of jazz, So I think music is always going through a metamorphosis, and sometimes it pulls us whether we want to or not, It
is about the most subjective thing there is, and probably maybe the most universal language there is as well. It's a strange beast. It is.
Yeah, but it is universal. That's for sure.
What was the very first concert you went to, the big concert, not necessarily your mother's tea concert when you were in second grade, but...
My mom took me to this, I think it was a polo match, and it was with a friend of hers, and it was somewhere up in North Toronto area, north of Toronto, about an hour and a half. And the performer that day was Gordon Lightfoot. And he was playing the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald.
Yes.
And I was standing 5 feet away from the stage, and this incredibly large audience of people all singing, and him and the band just like an electric church oozing off of this little podium stage that they were on.
Wow.
That was kind of where I was like, what is this?
How old were you?
I was 6.
Okay, yeah. That's about when it hits you, yeah.
And then it was like, okay, I've listened to 8-track tapes in the basement with Dad, and vinyl, but this whole thing with people doing it live. And then it wasn't until years later, I was like 12 or 13, I went and saw Bachman Turner Overdrive with a whole bunch of friends, and that was like the first really big concert. But yeah, again, it was like, just seeing that it's that communal... symbiotic appreciation, the feeling of ideas, that everybody's kind of into. Whether it be the cool tune, the popcorn number that everybody loves to sing, or something really special that's being said. That's that feeling that everybody goes there for and leaves with. So it's kind of like a recharging moment, like a recalibration, that's what I love about those big concert experiences.
Well articulated. Yeah, the first one I went to was Led Zeppelin, and I was 15. My brother took me. Gas was like 25 cents a gallon. The ticket was $3.50. They had 3 albums out, so they played cuts off of them, and then they kind of like ran out of material that they wanted to play of their own. So I started just jamming, and they were playing like garage band songs, anything from Wild Thing to Gloria, the stuff. I'm dating myself.
But dude, to say that you saw Zeppelin at
it was before Stairway. Pre-Stairway.
I'm not
Zepp.
worthy.
I know, exactly. No Zeppelin denied.
Wow. That's all I could say is wow.
But they played 4.5 hours, so I'm thinking,
wow.
okay, for $3.50.
And what you said the ticket was $3.50?
Yeah, $3.50. I'm thinking it had a good seat. It was festival seating. We got there early and stuff. But I thought all concerts are going to be like this. There wasn't an opening band. They played 4.5 hours, and no, that never happened again. So
no, and that's almost unheard of for I've seen Peter Gabriel. He's done 2.5 hours.
They were
Roger
in their early
Hott.
20s, so maybe 25. I think,
Right, so real young. But
Yeah.
it's still full of vinegar, right? So
Oh yeah.
yeah. Wow, that's so cool, Bruce.
Yeah, so like I said, I thought they were all going to be that way, but no, sadly mistaken. You have a bunch of guitars. What kind of guitars do you like?
Well, it's funny. I play a classical a lot when I'm playing guitar. And people are like, well, Ed, you use it for everything. I'm kind of like Willie Nelson. I'm not afraid to even plug it into pedals, drive it. For me, I have such big hands. This is why I gravitated to the bass. and for me, that wide neck feels so right underneath my fingers, and that's why I sort of gravitated to that sort of silk string instrument. But bass, I've been playing a Fender as long as I can remember. I had rented basses for school, and somebody would lend me something for a weekend, or we'd rent something from the local music store or whatever. But Fender just feels like it's a part of me. I for the longest time, because of Yes and Chris Squire and Geddy Lee from Rush, it was I got to get a Rickenbacker. And when I finally had a little bit of bread to put down, a down payment, and I played it, I went, I hate this.
What didn't you like about it?
That sort of polished neck, fretboard kind of feel to it, and then the instrument in my hand always felt like I was holding more of the neck than the body. The instrument was just sitting on my body.
Oh.
And when I put a Fender on a '68 style, it was it sat so well, and I had I was a chubbier kid. I'd lost 100 pounds in my late teens, early 20s.
Jeez, so you weigh 20 pounds now?
I'm only a $190 now, but yeah, I gained a little bit of weight, but I was 260 when I was in grade 10 and 11. I was a big boy, 46-inch waist, slow metabolism, right? It wasn't I was eating crazy stuff. I'd go to school with green pepper and oatmeal cookies, and kids were eating Nutella sandwiches and drinking Coca-Cola, and I'm well, I'm huge. What's going on here, right?
Oh, no.
But that's the same thing. When Steinberger came out with their basses, and I put one on, I felt like it was this Kleenex box with a hunk of bamboo coming at the end, no headstock. I was like, I can't play this either. So those bigger Fender style bodies are oh man, I can't get enough. And then with that, I bought a Strat years ago. I've been playing a Fender Strat as well for electric stuff. Play up some banjo. Last couple years, I bought a sitar.
Oh wow!
And fiddling around with a sitar, which I find really sort of has nothing to do with anything writing. It's more feeling it out. I'm a novice, but the stringed instrument thing more so than keyboarding was I gravitated to it because I don't know. It was just it was somehow more of a challenge, but you could take it everywhere. It was hard to move a piano. There weren't electric keyboards and stuff back then. We had Rhodes. Try moving a Rhodes around on a subway. I've done it.
They're pretty heavy too, yeah.
Yeah.
It wasn't until Casio or somebody came out with the little teeny bopper.
And Korg, and there was a whole bunch of people, Roland, and the new integration of electronic synthesizers changed the industry again because those sounds completely changed how people were writing and what they did and how they produced the music. And again, technology and that jump with the industry changed a lot.
I apologize. I named the cheapy one right off the bat. So.
That's okay. It's all good. And they were ones that actually made it extremely affordable for people to do that. Up here, Radio Shack I mean, I remember they put out the Moog, their version of the Moog, the Micro Moog, that you could get, and you could, fiddle with the waveforms and different in the algorithms. There was a couple slides that you could play with, but I mean, it wasn't a Moog.
And oscillators that you can't keep in tune. And remember the ARP Odyssey?
Yeah.
That was like a full-time job to keep the thing working during a gig. If you took it outside and the sun went behind or a cloud went in front of the sun, rather, you had to retune it. It was like, what the? So
my buddy bought a Yamaha CS80, and this thing was the size of a kitchen table. And it probably weighed as much as a small shark. And we picked it up, and they brought it down in an elevator. Like, we'll be back. We're bringing it down in the elevator. And we're like, elevator? And here were these two kids that go down on the subway. We brought this thing home. I think my buddy came down with his dad's luggage stroller, and it broke immediately when we put it on. Right?
Yeah.
So but when we plugged this thing in and turned it on, the lights would dim in this little basement we were jamming at my buddy's place. Right. Gear and what people have already learned from and gone through. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. For the listeners, we're talking on Skype, and you called me, and I didn't get any audio, and then I got back to you, and we went back and forth. Whenever that happens, I think ARP Odyssey. You know what? It's just bugs and stuff that, and people are, wow, this technology is just wonderful, isn't it? It is when it all works, but man, it's frustrating when it doesn't. And that was a good example. But I digress. What are your plans for the future?
Well, I'm in the process of grant writing applications right now for doing a new record, as well as some tour money, which is desperately needed for a lot of musicians that are doing what they're doing today. But that means that I've been writing. And I'm excited about that. But that's the other thing. Again, we're going through that fluctuation where it's like in the last 10 years I've put out 4 records. And the thing about the market and the way that it's changing is we've gone back to this more of 1950s single demographic. So with the songs that I've already written and been recorded, that are part of these grant applications, I'm thinking about doing single releases for the spring of 2018, and every time I do a release, I usually do a video that goes hand in hand with that. So that's sort of the plans for the spring and summer, to be going ahead with this project that I call A Recipe for Perpetual Spring. So another
like
grouping of another grouping of 10 to 15 songs over the course of a year or so, maybe released in a singular fashion. The other thing that I'm really excited about, when I released Red Omen, the last record that's been out, the title track is something that I felt would lend itself so well to some sort of animated cartoon. And for almost a year, I was contacting animation houses.
That's what I see when I listen to your music. That's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
But everybody says it's so kid-like, and I'm a big kid.
Well, you do shuffles. Shuffles. I'm hearing like Harry Nilsson, or even like Penny Lane. There is a barber showing photographs. Type of thing.
I love the tune, man. I love the tune.
It's happy stuff.
But and I heard back from this guy in New York City, Nelson Diaz, and he does all kinds of stuff for Nickelodeon, Disney, major video games, and I sent him the stuff like I've been sending to people for a year, like I said, and he's really interested in trying to help me put this anime together for the title track Red Omen. And that's even despite the album's a year and a half old, almost 2 years old, I'll be like, well, this is what I've been trying to do from the very beginning. Really illustrate the lyrics in that cartoon kind of fashion, because that's why I wrote the tune. It feels like a childhood memory that bleeds into a moment of today that then looks into the future.
That's so cool.
Hey, did I ever tell you that I grew up with Red Omen, and boy was he a neat kid. He had all sorts of really cool things to play with, like a plutonium spaceship lunchbox and a bathtub full of Lego. And I didn't believe you when somebody said that he fled with Jimi Hendrix to a UFO-type base camp up on Machu Picchu. Up on Machu Picchu. I said, excuse me, it's not my fault. He's playing the crime so he can't get caught. I said, excuse me, I must confess. Well, give me 2 words. Well, in my defense, laughing mad. I'm laughing mad. Laughing mad. There's a red hot stove down in Pittsburgh going out hard like a cherry pie. Call me a fibber, call me a liar, say it to my face, like a cross between Benjamin Franklin and Ian Pace. And I didn't believe the man from MI6 living out in the sticks, who souped up his side by side like Evel Knievel, just like Evel Knievel. I said, excuse me, it's not my fault. He's playing the crime so he can't get caught. I said, excuse me, I must confess. Well, give me 2 words. Well, in my defense, laughing mad. I'm laughing mad. I'm laughing mad. Laughing mad. For me today, you see my nerves are shattered, tired, tattered, beginning to fray. Just like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, realizing only now you're caught in someone else's claws. And I didn't believe in myself, if no one else, to be making voodoo music in some small town way up in Canada. Way up in Canada. I said, excuse me, it's not my fault. He's playing the crime so he can't get caught. I said, excuse me, I must confess. Well, give me 2 words. Well, in my defense, laughing mad. Well, I'm laughing mad. Well, I'm laughing mad. Laughing mad. Hey, did I ever tell you that I grew up with Red Omen? Boy, was he a neat kid.
Support for Better Each Day comes from BruceHilliardHomes.com. For a better day in buying or selling a home, search BruceHilliardHomes.com. Or visit our website, Better Each Day, for more information. And while you're there, subscribe to the show. It's free. That's BruceHilliardHomes.com, Windermere Real Estate. And make it better each day.
You've been listening to the Better Each Day podcast radio show with Bruce Hilliard. We'll be back with a new horizon, but until then, honor the future. It comes with a lifetime guarantee.
And we're all just trying to make the next day a bit better.